Right now, as you watch this, algorithms built by 20-something engineers in Palo Alto are deciding what you think, what you want, and who you become. And the terrifying part? They wrote the manual for this years ago, and never once showed it to you. My name is Marcus, and today we're cracking open the manipulation playbook that Silicon Valley spent billions perfecting, and billions more keeping hidden. We're talking about the exact psychological weapons used inside the world's most valuable companies, tools that redefined human behavior at a global scale. And by the end of this video you'll never look at your phone, your feed, or your own thoughts the same way again. Let's start in 2007. Steve Jobs walks on stage and tells the world the iPhone will change everything. He was right, just not in the way most people celebrate it. Within 5 years, average screen time exploded. Within 10, the average American was touching their phone over 2,600 times per day. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because a small group of people, engineers, behavioral scientists, and product designers, figured out how the human brain breaks. And then they built their products around those exact breaking points. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented. This is engineering. The first weapon in the playbook is something called the variable reward loop. And it traces back not to Silicon Valley, but to a behavioral psychologist named B.F. Skinner. In the 1950s, Skinner discovered that rats pressed a lever most obsessively when rewards came randomly, not every time, not never, but unpredictably. That unpredictability created compulsion. The not knowing became more powerful than the reward itself. Silicon Valley didn't invent this, they just scaled it to 2 billion people. Every time you pull down your Instagram feed and wait for new content to load, that's a slot machine. Designed deliberately. Filed in patents. Tested on millions. Former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris called it exactly that, a slot machine in your pocket. And he built these systems before he blew the whistle on them. But variable rewards are only the beginning. The second weapon is something far more invasive, and almost nobody talks about it. It's called social validation feedback. And it exploits the single most fundamental human psychological need, the need to belong. Every like, comment, and share triggers a dopamine response in the human brain chemically identical to social acceptance from your tribe, the survival signal your ancestors needed to stay alive. Facebook's own internal research team called the like button one of the most effective behavioral conditioning tools ever deployed. Their words, not mine. And they discovered something even darker, social rejection, a post that gets zero engagement, triggers the same neural pain pathways as physical injury. They knew this. They built notification systems anyway. They A/B tested the timing of those notifications to maximize emotional vulnerability. Let that sit for a moment. The world's most profitable companies knew their products caused psychological pain, and optimized to make that pain more effective at bringing you back. Now we need to talk about the architecture behind all of this. Because individual features don't explain the scale of control. The system does. In 2012, a Stanford researcher named B.J. Fogg published his behavior model, a framework for designing products that reliably change human behavior. It had 3 components: motivation, ability, and trigger. If you control all 3 simultaneously, you don't persuade people. You operate them. Fogg's students went on to build Instagram, LinkedIn, and dozens of the behavioral systems baked into Google and Facebook. He essentially trained the manipulation class of Silicon Valley. And Fogg's model was only one part of a much larger machine. The real infrastructure of control is the recommendation algorithm, and it was built to do one thing: maximize engagement at any cost. A former YouTube engineer revealed that the platform's recommendation algorithm was explicitly trained to push users toward more extreme content, because extreme content holds attention longer. Not because it was good for users. Not because it was true. Because it boosted watch time metrics, and watch time meant ad revenue. This is the core revelation of the playbook: your attention was never the product they were selling to you. Your attention was the raw material they were selling to advertisers. You were never the customer. You were always the commodity. And the manipulation playbook was the instruction manual for processing you. Now let's go deeper. Because the most sophisticated tool in the entire playbook isn't the algorithm or the notifications, it's the psychological profile they build on every single one of us. Cambridge Analytica wasn't an anomaly. It was a demonstration, a public glimpse of tools that ad tech companies had been quietly using for a decade before anyone noticed. Here's what the data actually reveals: with access to just 70 Facebook likes, an AI model can predict your personality more accurately than your closest coworker. With 150 likes, it beats your parents. With 300 likes, it predicts your behavior better than your own spouse. Think about what that means. Silicon Valley companies have psychological profiles on you that are more accurate than the people who love you most. And they use those profiles not just to show you ads, but to predict emotional states, identify vulnerability windows, and time their interventions for maximum impact. Facebook's internal documents, later leaked, showed they actively identified when teenagers felt insecure, lonely, or worthless, then sold those moments to advertisers. Not to help them. To sell that pain as premium ad inventory. The more broken you felt, the more valuable your attention became. Let's shift to the third weapon, one that operates so far below conscious awareness that most people never realize it's happening: the filter bubble. Eli Pariser named it in 2011, but the companies building these systems had already weaponized the concept years before it had a name. Every time you interact with content online, the algorithm learns what keeps your emotional temperature elevated, and builds a reality around that emotional state. It doesn't care if that reality is true. It cares if it's engaging. Outrage is the most engaging emotion humans produce, and the algorithm learned that on day one. Internal Facebook research showed that posts triggering anger and outrage received roughly 6 times more engagement than those triggering positive emotions. 6 times. So the algorithm didn't just amplify outrage accidentally, it was trained to reward it. To feed it. To make you addicted to a version of reality specifically calibrated to keep you angry. Because an angry person is an engaged person. And an engaged person is a monetized person. This is not a metaphor. This is the business model. Now here is where the playbook gets truly unsettling, because we've been talking about consumer manipulation. But the same tools were applied to democracy itself. In 2010, Facebook ran an experiment on 61 million users during a US election, without consent, to test whether social pressure messages could change real-world voting behavior. They could. In that single experiment, Facebook estimated it generated an additional 340,000 votes, by showing some users how many of their friends had voted. 340,000 votes. Manufactured by a single notification design choice. And they published it in Nature magazine like it was a triumph of science. The playbook doesn't just manipulate what you buy. It shapes who leads countries. It decides which movements rise and which ones disappear into the algorithm. And this leads us to the deepest layer of all, the part of the playbook that even most tech insiders don't fully grasp: the identity capture engine. Here's how it works: the algorithm doesn't just reflect who you are. Over time, it actively constructs who you become. It surfaces communities that match your existing fears, finds content that confirms your existing biases, and builds a curated social world that reinforces a narrower and narrower version of yourself. Psychologists call this identity crystallization, a point where your beliefs become so reinforced that changing them produces genuine psychological pain. The platform isn't just showing you things you like, it's training you to need those things. Training you to define yourself by them. Training you to defend them against all challenge. At this point, you don't need notifications to come back. You come back because the platform has become load-bearing infrastructure for your sense of self. That is the endgame of the manipulation playbook. Not addiction in the chemical sense, but dependency at the identity level. That's harder to break than any drug. So what does Silicon Valley say about all of this? Officially, they say the platforms are neutral. They say they just connect people. They say the algorithm serves users. But the engineers who built these systems tell a very different story. And more of them are leaving Silicon Valley with the same warning. Justin Rosenstein, who invented the Facebook like button, now limits his own use of Facebook. The inventor of the infinite scroll disabled it on his own phone. The people who designed the cage built their own houses outside it. That tells you everything you need to know about what they actually believed they had created. Now, and this is the part most documentaries skip, what do you actually do with this information? Because awareness without action is just a more sophisticated form of being lost. The first step is understanding that resistance starts with friction. Every time you introduce a pause between impulse and action, you interrupt the conditioning loop. Turning off notifications. Using grayscale mode. Keeping your phone in another room while you sleep. These aren't just productivity tips. They are acts of cognitive self-defense. The second step is algorithmic hygiene. Actively seeking information that challenges your existing views, not to change your mind necessarily, but to keep it porous. To keep it yours. And the third, the most profound, is asking a question these platforms are architecturally incapable of asking for you: who were you before the algorithm decided who you should be? Here's the uncomfortable truth: Silicon Valley's playbook depends on you never reaching. You are not the sum of your behavioral data. You are not your engagement metrics. You are not your algorithm. The most disruptive thing you can do in an attention economy is simply become harder to manipulate. Not through anger, not through paranoia, but through awareness. The playbook only works on people who don't know it exists. Now you do. And that changes everything. If this changed how you see the world, share it with someone who still thinks the algorithm is on their side. And subscribe, because the next video goes even deeper.